Perilous lore. It's only the 3rd episode. I'll get it eventually. You know, be able to say the name of the show that I made up on the first try. Maybe someday. Still have a hard time saying Grim Podcast of Perilous Adventure sometimes, but, you know, only done that we've recorded 38 episodes, so I've only said it at least a few hundred times probably. But, you know, eventually we'll get it. It's just how things go. I mean, I love the joke and saying, oh, it's not like I talk for a living because I'm a teacher. All right, so welcome. This episode 3, we're going to do the Empire Part 2. We finished up last time. I decided to split it into 2 episodes because it's a big place, the Empire. There's a lot going on. We're not going to talk about that just yet, though. I want to talk a little bit about what's gaming, right, since last week. I don't think it's changed too much. I don't, you know, I dropped one of my props. Great start. The big thing is, I think I talked about this last time, Star Wars Legion. I know it's not Warhammer, but giving that a shot as a new minis game to kind of mix things up with Marvel Crisis Protocol. I know last week we had to, we weren't able to do our, the Power Phase stream last Monday. We had some emergencies among the cast players, so we had to kind of table that for the week. So tomorrow, Tim and I are still going to play our what I was promoting last week. We're going to do it this week instead. I'm going to play Defenders. Tim's going to play something. I don't remember. Guardians. He's playing the Guardians list. And I'm playing Defenders with Doctor Strange, Hulk, Wolverine, Hawkeye, because I want to do that, and it sounds fun. But yeah, so we're getting to Legion. Tim and I tried it out the other night. Just a small, like in the rule book for this new starter set, I got the Clone Wars era one, because I like clones better than stormtroopers, and Obi-Wan's awesome. We really liked it so far. We did this really, really basic. It didn't even include all the rules like suppression, which seems legit. But so far it seems pretty streamlined, pretty easy to get into, and it's not a huge barrier of entry like something like 40K, which we both have played and haven't in a long time. Like I said previous times, it's the Marvel Crisis Protocol has been our jam. Other than that, I picked up, I know these things aren't Warhammer, but it's okay, Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden for D&D, mostly for inspiration for things. Been writing my own game, The Paul, which you can get on our Patreon. The first 2 episodes of that are up at time of recording this. Every Wednesday, those are going up for the first 4. That'll probably be a little hiatus before we do more. But I love anything ice, and I was very excited when this was announced. And then we started playing more other games like WFRP and Pathfinder 2. So D&D really took a back seat. But I figure it doesn't hurt to have more material ever, more things to read, because I'm not the fastest reader anyway. But, you know, we'll get to it eventually. I've been looking through it. It's pretty cool. I like the idea for monsters I can take for my own world and stuff. Yeah, that's been it for this week. We had planned, I've been prepping for Gapapa, Grim Podcast of Perilous Adventure. Unfortunately, we had to take a week off from that as well. Well, we do it every 2 weeks, but we had to take this Friday off because of illness. Not COVID or anything, but just being extra cautious, and we weren't able to do our recording, and it was so sad because it had been 2 weeks, and now we got to wait another 2 weeks, and, you know, lots of tears, actually. It's so much fun. We enjoy it a lot. But this Friday we get to record Lost Omens, the Lost Omens podcast, our Pathfinder 2 podcast run by Danny. Super fun. But yeah, that's it. That's my week in gaming. If you haven't checked out Star Wars Legion, it's really good so far from what I've seen. I know it's quite popular, so, you know, give it a shot. Maybe your local store has some demo stuff or whatever. As for the Black Library recommendations of this week, we're talking about the Empire. I don't want to do a book that was all about the Empire. There's quite a few out there that really focus on the Empire. I want to do a book that was just kind of set in the Empire. I figured it was good enough time as any to talk about the first Warhammer book I read. Boom! Trollslayer. So I was so incredulous about this whole thing, Warhammer, when I first heard about it, and I was like, this seems ridiculous. And my brother was reading this again, because he's the one that got me into it, so a lot goes back to him my brother Tim, not that Tim, different Tim, and he had this book on a shelf in his room or whatever, and I picked it up and I was like, what is this? Some book about a dwarf and an elf that magically become friends, like Gimli and Legolas? Like, they don't even have original ideas? And he's like, no, that's a human. His name's Felix. And I was like, oh, okay. Is it good? And he's like, yeah, it's great. And I was like, all right, fine, I'll read it. I like fantasy a lot. I was really into Lord of the Rings at the time. This was like 2001, 2002. So I checked it out and never looked back. I love Gotrek and Felix, to the point that my son's name is Felix. Hey, Wargaming Dad, how's it going? But yeah, I love this book. A lot of people don't like it because they don't realize it is a series of shorts. These were, I believe, originally published in White Dwarf in the late 80s or early 90s. This book is from the early 90s. I'm pretty sure. I didn't look at the copyright date. I don't have copies of these things anymore. They're almost all my brother's that I read. I have a couple laying around, but I did forget to look up the copyright date. I believe it's early 90s. But I just fell in love with it right away because it was just cool. Just low fantasy, but high adventure, if that makes any sense. The screen keeps freezing. Not after that, Felix. For me, it is. Yeah. When we were naming Felix, I threw out a bunch of Warhammer names I knew would never pass muster. I tried like Gabriel or Seth as the Flesh Terrorist chapter master. I tried Dante because I play Blood Angels. I threw out some ridiculous ones like Gotrek himself. And then I was like, what about Felix? And she was like, yeah, I kind of like that. That's pretty good. So it worked. So I have a kid named after a Warhammer character, which is pretty cool. But yeah, so this one, it's a series of shorts. Like the chapter, it's broken up like chapters, but they're each their own stories. One of them is really cool about Geheimnisnacht, similar to Halloween, where they like accidentally walk into a ritual summoning demonettes of Slaanesh in the middle of the woods. Really cool, like, horror story. There's the story of how Felix got his sword, Caragol, which is like a super anti-dragon sword. There's some really great moments as it goes through the series where the sword, like, kind of forces Felix to go towards dragons, and it makes him, like, lose his mind when he's near dragons, even though he knows he can't fight a dragon. Like, these aren't D&D dragons. There's not, like, wormlings. Like, this is a, 100-foot-long giant monster that Felix has no chance against, but the sword pushes him towards it, and it's great. There's the story of how Gotrek lost his eye from a goblin attack. He got stabbed in the eye with a spear. Spoiler alert. Not really. But yeah, I like this one a lot. A lot of people put this near the bottom of the list of the Gotrek and Felix books because there's like 20-something. I like this one it kicks everything off. It's very different. It's kind of like the Gunslinger versus the rest of the Dark Tower series. Again, it was originally published as short stories. The Gunslinger was originally published in Fantasy and Science Fiction magazine over a few years. It's kind of how one of the ways King got his start as a writer. He had these accolades that he was published in this magazine, and they put it together in a book. So it's very disconnected from the other stories that way, where they were super long novels. So like. Danny is reading the Dark Tower series. She hates the Gunslinger, but she enjoyed the other ones. I think she's in the Wastelands right now, because Blaine is a pain, and she likes the other ones, but she hated the Gunslinger. So I think a lot of people don't realize that going into Trollslayer, that it's not one 250-ish page novel. It's like 6 or 7 stories, maybe even fewer. But I think it's really cool. It's got a lot of cool ideas. They fight a chaos troll at one point. That's the troll of the name of the book. And then it kicks off the whole series that is still coming out. Skaven Slayer. Let me see if I can remember the order at all. It's Trollslayer, then Skaven Slayer, which a lot of people put way at the top because it introduces Gracier Thankwol, who's the best character. If you know anything about Skaven, he is like the ultimate representation of Skaven. He's just ambitious beyond his means. He snuffs Warpstone all the time. He's got this rat ogre named Bone Ripper that he keeps having to replace. He's amazing. Skaven Slayer, then I believe it's Demon Slayer. They go up to the Chaos Wastes. And then we have Dragon Slayer, Beast Slayer, Vampire Slayer, Giant Slayer. I feel like I'm missing one. I think there's 7 in the first round. Let me see. Trollslayer, Skaven Slayer, Demon Slayer, Beast Slayer, Dragon Slayer. I forget which order those go in. Vampire Slayer, Giant Slayer. Yeah, that's 7. And that was all by William King. He did all of those. And then it was kind of like Giant Slayer ended when I was first reading these. I was in college. It was the early 2000s. I was like, oh, obviously Gotrek dies in Giant Slayer because it's the last book. There hasn't been a new one in years. And you read it, and again, spoiler alert, he doesn't die on the page. And I'm like, but where's the rest of the series? If he's not dead, it's got to keep going. The whole point is that he's trying to die in glorious battle against a worthy opponent. What? Then they started it back up a few years later by Nathan Long. He did Orc Slayer, which is probably my least favorite, just because I feel like Nathan Long, he did a few of them, and it took him a little while to really understand the characters and how to write a Gotrek and Felix book. Orc Slayer is pretty weak for me. Manslayer is kind of cool. It takes place in Nuln a lot. We'll talk a bit about in the lore section today. Elf Slayer was really cool. I like that one a lot. They go to a black arc of the Dark Elves. What's after that? Shaman Slayer, which is mostly about Beastmen again. And then Zombie Slayer, I believe, was the last one that he did. And that was like another ending where it was a few years before they did anything else. Zombie Slayer is probably my favorite. It's about a siege, and then he brings back some older characters that are kind of recurring in that one. And Gotrek fights Krell, this this undead white that has the black axe of Krell that almost kills Gotrek. That one's really, I don't know what it is about that one. I really like that one. And then there were a couple like standalone ones that didn't have Slayer in the title. There was like Road of Skulls and City of the Damned, takes place in Mordheim, and the Serpent Queen, I think, was one. I didn't even read that one. The Road of Skulls and City of the Damned just weren't great. I don't know what it was about them. I didn't like them very much. And then we got the End. Books that came out during the End time. There was Kinslayer and Slayer. On my blog, on my website, that I haven't updated in months because I've kind of forgot about it with all the podcast stuff, dancoleauthor.com, I did my review of Slayer there. I read Kinslayer, and then it was like a year or two before I finally read Slayer. I wasn't a huge fan of Kinslayer. It was a different author again. I believe it was David Geimer. And again, I just felt like he didn't know how to write these characters. It started off, there was this big time jump from Zombie Slayer to Kinslayer, and I just felt like it didn't make any sense. Felix was living in Altdorf with a wife who apparently was a vampire, but not. I don't know. It was really weird. And he had like given up on his oath to Gotrek, which I felt like he had been given this opportunity so many times with better circumstances for him, and he didn't do it. And I just felt like it was super out of character for him to just be like, I'm done. And then Gotrek, of course, is all pissed off, and he's fighting in fighting with the Empire in the battles of the end times against these huge chaos incursions from the north. And then something happens where Felix has to go find his nephew Gustav or something. So of course he ends up with Gotrek, and Gotrek is really mad. And even though he told Felix he could go, he was still pissed off at Felix. It didn't make any sense to me. And then other characters from the series get pulled in and whatnot, and the ending was good. I really liked they fight a dragon ogre, which, if you listen, I think it was last episode, the first episode, I talked about one of the reasons I got into Warhammer was because of Beastmen and the look of dragon ogres, and I thought they were awesome. So he fought this dragon ogre Shaggoth. Cool fight. They fight Trog. Is it Throg or Trog? Oh, I just left my head. I've been playing Marvel Puzzle Quest, and there's Throg, the Frog Thor. So now I'm getting it mixed up if it's Throg or Trog, the Troll King. The ending was pretty good, but I felt like the first 3/4 of the book I just couldn't stand. And then Slayer I read, and I read 100 pages of it, and then I was like, nope, I'm not doing it. I can't do it. I hated it. And then I read a couple other books, and I was like, all right, I'm going to go back to this. I'm doing book reviews for my blog. I'm going to do it. So I finished the book, and I hated it. Awful. It was like the worst ending. I don't even remember a lot of it now. I have the blog about it. It's pretty long, my thoughts on it, and it's just like, I just didn't like what they did at all. I mean, I hated the end times in general anyway. I'll go on record saying it. I thought the end times were like the worst thing they could have done to change the game. I understand they wanted to switch things up and do the Age of Sigmar because fantasy stuff just wasn't selling well. But it was like literally destroying the world was the worst thing they could have done. Because it was just like, oh, you've been a fan of this for a long time? Well, screw you. We're going to literally destroy it. And it was just like, it left a bad taste in my mouth for years. I'm still mad about it. And it was just like, this was just another one of those where it's like, oh, you like this series? You've been reading it for decades? Okay, we're just gonna ruin it at the end. A lot of people really like this one as the end and like explaining what happens to the two of them, but I felt like so much was left unsaid for a final book in the series that like they're not gonna go back and explain what happened. I really hate what they did to Felix. I really hate it. And not just because I like the character and what happened to him. I just felt like it was bad storytelling. So, Gotrek and Felix, love the series to death, except for the last two books. You could just not read them. Just stop at Zombie Slayer. It's great. They did bring the Gotrek back for Age of Sigmar books. The first one's called Realm Slayer. And then I think Ghoul Slayer is the second one. I listened. It came out just as an audio drama first. And, like, it was okay. It wasn't anything special. My brother liked it. Tim, who plays Lucky on a Grim Podcast or Perilous Adventure, is enjoying it or enjoyed it, listening to it. I didn't really like it. I'd probably give it like 2 out of 5 stars. Slayer, I gave 1 in my review. 1 star. Well, 1 axe of Grimnir. But Realm Slayer, I'm not going to bother reading more of the Gotrek books because they're not the Gotrek and Felix books anymore. They're just Gotrek books, which might give you a hint of why I'm not a fan of them. I mean, maybe I'll try in the future if I can like get a copy for free or whatever, but I wasn't a huge fan. So highly recommend the first, 18 or whatever. Read the ones by William King, Nathan Long, and I think that's it. Just stop there. Read through Zombie Slayer, and then you're good to go. You don't have to know what happens after that. You make it up on your head. But yeah, so I spent way too long talking about that. I got heated a little bit. This heater next to me is really hot when turned down. But yeah, love Gotrek and Felix, except for those couple that I don't at all. And it's an extreme. You love them or you hate them. But yeah, really enjoyed those. So I'm going to jump into talking about our lore focus of the week. That's not the picture I wanted to bring up. Is the Empire. Went over a bunch of the provinces last time. I learned some new stuff from this new release from Cubicle 7 for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th Edition, The Archives of the Empire. There's cool stuff. There's a really, really good book. I talked about it a whole bunch last episode, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail this time. Just covers all the provinces, all their leaders. It gives us some new careers, including the Halfling Badger Rider, which if any of my characters die on Grim Podcast of Perilous Adventure, they're going to make a Badger Rider or a Rat Catcher. They have a choice. I'll give them a choice. They can be one of those two. They're both good. But we are going to talk about the rest of them. Hopefully I don't talk. I forgot to mark down on my notes here, my 4.5 pages of notes, which ones I talked about last time. Hopefully I just remember because it's only been a week. We'll see. If I start talking about something, hopefully somebody in the chat is like, hey, you covered that one last time, idiot. And I'll be like, oh, thank you. So I want to start with Nuln, which I don't believe we got to last time because we didn't talk about the different schools. Nuln was my favorite place in the Empire for a while. I loved the idea of the engineering there. They were known for cannon. They were known for steam tanks. I just realized I'm not recording the audio. Oh, I forgot to hit. Oh, man, give me just a second. Well, that's really embarrassing and frustrating. Came down here 15 minutes early to make sure I got everything all set. Had the soundboard on, which is why I have audio. I forgot to put the memory card in and start recording. Oh, well. Yeah, so if you are listening to this in the podcast version, you just missed me talking about Gotrek and Felix books and how much I hate Kinslayer and Slayer and Realmslayer. The rest of them are great. Read them. So Archives of the Empire, we're going to talk about Nuln. So this is often known as like the engineering city. It is it's been on the rise for a while because of what it produces, and it's kind of become a rival to Altdorf as like the new up-and-coming place, the place thinking about the future, especially with how much they produce, like you said, cannon and weaponry and guns. So Nuln is interesting. It's kind of like Middenheim, where it is itself a Friedstadt. It's a city-state. It's called the Crown That Glitters with 1,000 Jewels, is like the unofficial name of the city, which is pretty cool. It's also known as the City of Engineers, as I said before. Nuln also incorporates the county of Wissenland, or Wissenland? I don't know how to say it. I'm going to say Wissenland because I'm American, and my tongue is often pretty dumb with these kind of things. So this has probably my favorite name for the ruler, is Countess Emmanuel of House Liebwitz, the Grand Countess of Nuln, the Countess of Wissenland, and the Duchess of Meissen. Meissen? I'm going to say Meissen. She just seems really cool. The little bit I've read about her here and there, she's like a miser, and she's like old, like quite old, and she doesn't take crap from anybody. She's pretty awesome. I just love the idea of this old wizened lady with the rune fang, this 4-foot long sword that's magic beyond belief. Nuln is really cool. It's reported as a melting pot of races. It's not just humans here. There are a lot of dwarves, good amount of elves for the Empire. Fair bit of halflings are relatively close to the Moot, so kind of a lot of those. It's a very, very wealthy city because of the things that they make. Let's see. But the people that live here, people of Wissenland, are descended from the Morogan tribes. They're typically tall, light-skinned, and dour, which is, I just love that description, where because of where they live, things don't really go right for them. Wissenland is mostly out of the forests. Oh, let's bring up our map. Let's look at that. Wissenland is mostly out of the forests. We can see, I'll blow this up, very southern part of the Empire. Not quite the southernmost province, we'll talk about a little bit. And you can see Nuln is where a few of the rivers converge. I believe the Aver and the Reich meet in Nuln. And then Nuln is kind of incorporates Wissenland. So you can see there's basically no forest in Wissenland, at least no major forest there. Pretty well, mostly things like plains. I think they do a lot of growing things, probably a lot of cattle as well. We got, let's see, there's a large Tillian population in Nuln, which is kind of cool because it's the southernmost major city of the Empire. It's close to Tillia, so there's a large Tillian population. There's a lot of Tillian mercenaries there. We have a couple of engineering schools that produce cannon and handguns. And I love this, and I didn't hear the story before. It probably canon somewhere else, but I definitely read it in the Archives book I was talking about a minute ago. There's the Imperial Gunnery School and the College of Engineering, and they butt heads all the time. They hate each other, which is kind of fun and cool. I like the idea that it's not just it's you go to Nuln, you go to the engineering school. It's do you go to the College of Engineering, or do you go to the Imperial Gunnery School? And the College of Engineering is on its last legs. It's kind of dilapidated. A lot of the place isn't used anymore because there just aren't as many students as there used to be. The Imperial Gunnery School is really taken over as the prime place, but the College of Engineering kind of has that legacy to it. It's been around for a long time. It produces the best stuff still. Kind of like Ratchet Lines of coaches versus Four Seasons, where Ratchet Lines has been around a lot longer. They have higher quality coaches, but they are more expensive and seen as the Nobles coach, whereas Four Seasons is just starting up and they're everywhere, and it's a bit cheaper, but it's not quite as nice. Same kind of idea. I like Nuln. That was originally when I was creating an Empire army for Warhammer Fantasy Battles. I was going to have them from Nuln. They were like black and like a cream color, which eventually, I said last time, I changed to Averland instead by changing all the cream to yellow because of Marius Leetdorf. He was the best. All right, next one we're going to get into here is, I'm going to skip one that I have in my notes. I'm going to go south to Sudenland. Or Sudenland. I'm assuming it's Sudenland. So that's not on our map here. It's a very, very new province. It was created because the elector of Stirland, we can see on the map here where it says Wissenland, former realm of Stirland. The elector died. His Runefang was lost to an orc from a Wa. It was coming through. Killed a bunch of people, including their elector, and the Runefang was taken. Pretty big deal. So that province was like dissolved completely and became part of Wissenland. Fairly recently, Sudenland is ruled by the Elector Countess Etelka Morella of House Toppenheimer, the Grand Baroness of Sudenland, Baroness of Fieldorf, and Baroness of Geschburg. So Sudenland is relatively new. It was created about 200 years ago by Magnus the Pious in year 2305 of the Imperial calendar. Which you might think, well, 200 years, why is it not on these maps then? Well, it's just the rate things happen in the Empire is incredibly slow. This isn't today's technology. To include Sudenland on these maps just takes a lot of time and effort to redraw these maps with all this, and a lot of people are really upset about it. What's really interesting to me about Sudenland, besides the fact that one reason I chose to talk about Gotrek and Felix today, because I knew we were going to talk about Sudenland, constantly mentioned that his red cloak is Sudenland wool. We can see just a little bit of it there. They talk about how it's Sudenland wool all the time. We can see, again, because it's down in the southern part of the Empire, it's not covered in forest. There's plenty. They have lots of sheep here, so they are well known for their wool products. So his Sudenland cloak is mentioned all the time. Is one reason why I picked that book to talk about today. So when Magnus the Pious created this province out of what was left of the areas, the land of Stirland, and he took some of Wissenland as well. So a lot of people got mad about this, especially Wissenlanders, because they felt like it was their land. But their elector, the Countess Morella, doesn't have a Runefang. So a lot of people say that she's not really an elector count, even though she has a vote, as Bastion helped me with last time, reminding me that they are electors in that they vote for the Emperor, not so much that they get voted into power. She doesn't have a Runefang. Her Runefang is actually wielded by Kurt Helborg, the champion of the Emperor, his right-hand guy in battle. It was taken from the Stirland elector by Gorbag Ironclaw, who, by the way, had the best model after they remade it in 2003 or 4 or something like that. He was this sweet orc war boss riding a boar, and on his back was the Stirland Runefang, which was really cool. For whatever reason, the Empire, when they found it in the Grey Mountains, they got it back. They went on some expeditions. They found it finally, because Gorbag didn't live forever, of course. Orcs don't do that. And they didn't give it, I think when they found it, Sudenland wasn't around yet, or for whatever reason, they didn't give it to the leader of Sudenland. Instead, Reichland essentially has 2 Runefangs. Kurt Helborg wields it as the general of all the Empire armies. Especially, he leads Reichland, but he is kind of like the commander in chief essentially of the armies. If the Emperor doesn't ride to war, and he gets to wield this Runefang, and it's interesting. I love the little political things that they sprinkle in all the time where, the Countess and her people have been spreading a rumor, trying not to make it obvious that she's the one doing it, but that the Runefang that they found isn't really a Runefang. It's just a different magical sword. So it's well, it doesn't matter if we don't have it because that's not the real one anyway. There's also competing rumors of the same thing, that it's not really a Runefang, because people want, when they do, they're thinking ahead, in Nuln and Wissenland thinking ahead, if we say the sword that Kurt Kurt Helborg has isn't really a Runefang, when they do finally give it to an elector of, I lost the name, of Sudenland, then they won't be legitimate because it's not really a Runefang. It's not just a symbol of power. It's like literally, I mean, it is a symbol of power. It literally shows who is the leader. So I love that there's like these competing rumors that are kind of saying the same thing, but for very different purposes. So pretty cool. Let's see. They are with rich farmland, of course. They have lots of cattle and sheep. Excuse me. They are close with dwarves because they are surrounded on two sides by mountains. They have a lot of treaties with dwarves. You see, if you go in this corner of Wissenland, the very southernmost part of the map, is where Sudenland is. We can see there's a lot. It's surrounded by mountains on two sides, so of its like triangle shape. So they have close ties with the dwarves. They even have treaties to call on troops of the dwarves. So like they can say, hey, we need your help, and the dwarves will be like, all right, fine. Unless they have a special clause in there, because dwarves are no fools. They know how to write a contract that if it's for one of their stupid civil wars, they're not going to get involved. They're like, we're not going to help humans fight humans like this. If it's humans and orcs, sure, we will fight with you, no problem. If it's humans and I don't know where they draw the line. If it's like, barbaric, in quotes, humans from somewhere else, if they would help fight them, I don't know. But they said specifically they won't help fight in civil wars, which I love that idea. Let's see, here they are descended from the Morogan, same as in Nuln and Wissenland, and the Menegoth tribes, which that one's just fun to say. The Menegoths are shorter than Morogans and typically of more bronze tint to their skin, a bit darker because they're further south. And here they worship Raya heavily, kind of typically Tal and Raya are kind of put together as like the wilderness type gods. They also worship a god that's like a local god, Sol, the sun, essentially. S-O-L-L, and the O has a umlaut on top of it. And they also worship, who is the Menegoth god of vengeance. They want that sword back so they can wreak vengeance, or whatever. I like Sudenland a lot because it's like the underdog. Let's go to, and Felix, where's their cloak? All right, the one I skipped over I want to talk about next. We're going to jump around a little bit because last time we talked about Averland because that was the army I played, and I want to talk about them. We're going to go north from, what did we just talk about? North from Sudenland. We're going to pass over Wissenland, pass over Averland. We're going to check out Stirland. A lot of people really like Stirland. Stirland is known for being weird and like the rural backwater of the Empire. People don't really trust people from Stirland. Stirland is ruled by the Elector Count Albrecht of House Haupt Anderson, the Grand Count of Stirland, the Prince of Wertbad, and the Overlord of Slovenia. All his titles. Oh, what is Slovenia, you might ask? What does that have to do with Stirland? We see that on the map in pretty big letters in black. We'll talk about that in just a second. So the people here are descended from the Assaborn tribe. They're of average height, tanned skinned. They are very superstitious, and they are considered rubes by the rest of the Empire, especially by Reichlanders and Nulners, see Stirlanders as dumb hicks, essentially. Here they worship Tal more than Sigmar, or Tal, and more recently Sigmar are highly venerated, but Tal is like their main guy here. They're known for two things, other than being rubes. They're known for their beer. They say they make the best beer of any humans, and they are known for knowing all about their ancestry. They can tell you who married their uncle 3 generations back, blah, 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 which a lot of people try to make fun of them and say that they're just tall halflings or whatever because the Moot, we'll talk about in a little bit, we can see is right there, was taken from lands of Stirland. And they hate that. Stirlanders really don't like halflings because it's kind of like Sudenland, their land was taken to create this other province of these specific peoples, and Stirlanders and halflings just kind of don't get along, even though they live right next to each other. Slovenia. A lot of people love Slovenia, or they don't know everything about Slovenia. Slovenia has always been a funny name to me because I used to have a TV that was by the company Slovenia. Obviously, it's meant to sound like Transylvania. It's the land of vampires. So Slovenia is really cool because it's kind of left alone in the Empire. People try not to go there. It's a dangerous place. It is ruled by the vampires here. We can see, let's see if I can blow this up big enough so I can actually read what it says there. I think it's Castle Drakenhof, if I'm thinking right. Because I know Castle Drakenfels, the book I'm actually currently reading, Drakenfels, is over in the Grey Mountains, just southwest of Reichland. I believe it's Castle Drakenhof, which I think is where Gotrek and Felix go in Vampire Slayer, if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, so these are the lands of the vampire counts, is what the name of that book. There was an army for Warhammer Fantasy Battles. That's why it was called that. So this place is avoided by most. Even the dwarves that live in the World's Edge Mountains here don't like going here. There's the Haunted Hills of Slovenia, and it's seen as this dark place of death. Stirland, even their coat of arms, their flag is a skeleton holding a banner. Pretty cool. But yeah, so it's kind of like well known and accepted that there are vampires here. People try not to go there if they can help it. They actually have representatives in the capital of Stirland, which I forgot to write down. Wertbad is what because he's the Prince of Wertbad. Wertbad or Vertbad. They actually have representatives there to represent Slovenia, so they actually are they're technically part of the Empire. They get, they can have troops sent there, and they can get reinforcements. They pay taxes. Really, really interesting, especially if you've read Drakenfels and like the idea that vampires are known of and not quite accepted in the Empire, but kind of tolerated. I feel like that lore has kind of changed over the years. I said I'm currently reading Drakenfels for the first time. It was written in the late 80s, I think, or very early 90s. It was an early Black Library book for Warhammer Fantasy. And so far, what I've read, I'm like a quarter of the way through, not super far. It seems like how the Empire views and tolerates vampires has slightly changed over time. Like in our time, how the lore is developed, where it seems like back then it was written that vampires were kind of known about, and it was kind of okay as long as they weren't outwardly eating people, like the Strigoi vampires. We'll do a whole episode in the future on vampires and the different kinds of vampires and where they came from, because I love the idea of the different types of vampires, like blood dragons and Lamians and von Karsteins, which some people try to give me crap about how I say von Karstein, because there was actually a pronunciation guide. I think it was in the Night's Dark Masters, actually, behind me, the book. It might have been in a White Dwarf, where it says you roll the R a little bit, and the end rhymes with wine, so it's von Karstein. Some people try to say von Karstein or something like that. Nope, von Karstein, which just kind of sounds, Slovenian. Super cool. Love this area. A lot of people really, really dig it. I don't want to go into too much detail because I want to talk more about that kind of stuff in a future episode about vampires. The Strigoi being my favorite. That's it for Stirland. I think we have just a couple left here. We got, next up, we're going to go a bit, we'll bring up our map big again. We'll go a bit west of Slovenia, a little bit north, actually quite a bit west and north, and we're going to talk about Talibheim, which is really, really cool. I didn't know anything about this city other than it was what they always painted the studio Warhammer army of the Empire for, as being from Talibheim, I believe, like red and white, if I'm remembering correctly. Which always drove me crazy that it wasn't Altdorf or Reichland, because that's the capital. But whatever, they always chose Talibheim. Talibheim is really cool. It's another city-state that incorporates a whole province, the county of Hochland, which is real cool. I feel like I talked about this last time. I can't remember. Yeah, because I totally read off the name of the Hochland long rifle, and I talked about how annoying they were in game. But yeah, Talibheim is the city in the crater. So I believe that is all of them, other than the Moot. So forget Hochland and Talibheim. Pretty sure I talked about that last episode, so you can go listen to episode 2, Empire Part 1 for that. I want to talk about the Moot very briefly. So the Moot land, keeping the map up so we can see it. This is south of Stirland in Slovenia. It's a pretty small place. It was carved out from Stirland. it's technically called the Mootland, or Mootland. It is more affectionately just known as the Moot. It was created in 1010 of the imperial calendar, so it's about half as old as the Empire. The Empire obviously would have been founded in 0 imperial reckoning. It is currently 2512 in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition, so it's roughly half the time, a little bit more that the Moot has been around. And this was created by Emperor. I love this story so much. It's created by Emperor Ludwig the Fat. Founded the county out of Stirland as a joke to the Elector Count of Stirland at the time. I love it so much that the Moot is actually was a joke in the world. Some elector or emperor was like, "Well, I don't really like the messing around with the Count of Stirland," and he's like, "Well, I'm just gonna take a bunch of your lands and give it to the halflings." Also, is the most fertile soil in the whole empire for growth of crops. One reason why the halflings are so well known for their cooking, they have the best ingredients. It just makes sense. I love this place. There's a great story. I wish I could remember where it's from. It might be from a White Dwarf or one of the collections where there's, I don't